Hi everyone, a very warm evening to all of you. So, folks, thank you everyone for joining in with us today. I believe we all are aware that today we are going to be a part of an exciting masterclass related to the topic of social media marketing with strategies for success. I would like to now introduce myself first. So, I am Raghav Gautam, a seasoned education and technology professional. I have worked in domains like sales, marketing, partnership and alliances, learning and development, and currently I handle the corporate relations at Masters Union. So we have Mrs. Tara Kapur with us, the speaker of our masterclass today. And if I talk about her, so Tara comes with an extensive experience in media and entertainment industry. She has worked with several high-profile companies, including Netflix, Vice Media, The Times Group, ET Now, and Bloomberg TV. In a lineup of notable achievements, she was recognized as the most influential content marketing professional of 2022 by World Marketing Congress. In fact, in 2016, she also co founded Vitamins 3, a digital platform that creates feminist content and several awards for its innovative approach to storytelling. We are excited to have you, Tara, with us today. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Raghav, for a very generous introduction. I'm just going to put up my screen and present. Raghav, if you can give me a thumbs up.
Yes, yes.
Okay,
You're
sweet.
audible and it is visible
Super.
perfectly.
So yeah, I think just super quickly, I think I can skip through a majority of the introduction because Raghav's already done that. But I wanted to introduce myself to the group. I wanted to give you an overview of the social media landscape in India, how you can develop winning social media strategies, and ideally this should be in quotes because it's very difficult to understand what will win. You have to take a lot of chances when it comes to social media, but this is a playbook that you can sort of apply to your work, or even if you want to do it for your own social media, that's also possible. And then I wanted to give, along with that, like as I talk through what that strategy could look like, I wanted to give you an example of several brands that are winning the social media game and what they're doing to be ahead of the curve, and some examples of what worked for them in terms of what we're doing. So yeah, I think super quickly, Raghav's already introduced me. So I've worked in marketing and advertising for about 15 years. A large part of that has been with digital disruptor brands and with brands that have focused a lot on social media. What's interesting with what I do right now is I work with the absolute opposite. I work with a testing product called the Duolingo English Test, which is not necessarily the most social media friendly brand, but I think there's things that I apply to what our social media strategy is, because ultimately our objective for our product is to speak to students who are looking to study abroad, and they live and breathe social media. So as a brand, we need to be active on that platform. To give you a sense of why social media is important, I think it's important to just understand the size of the market itself. There's over 467 million Indians who are active on social media platforms, right? That's 1/3 of the entire population that's using at least one social media platform in general. Of that, close to 400, so 398 million are users aged 18 plus. So that's the demographic that you would technically be promoting to, because you're not going to be advertising necessarily to students, to people under 18. And that's close to 40% of the population that's over 18 in India. So it's a massive baseline to be looking at. But I think the one caveat that I think a lot of people know, but a lot of people don't know how dramatic it is. Social media in India is very, very male skewed. So it's almost 75% of social media users who are male, about 25% are female, right? So I think being able to carve out and find the right audiences, and that's sort of where Vitamins 3 played a role, right? Like, was to try and create safe spaces for women on social media, because a lot of the narrative and a lot of the conversation, a lot of the chatter you see on social media will be dominated by male voices, given how skewed the audience is in India. But a few other things that I think are interesting when it comes to Indian user behavior on social media. Just give me a second. Sorry, I had to just quit my WhatsApp. It was making a lot of noise. Yeah, so I think just a few other things that I think were interesting in terms of Indian user behavior on social media. They spend close to 3 hours as average daily time spent on social media platforms. So that's a large part of your day that's spent distributed across social media platforms. Most Indians use an average of about 9 social media platforms per month. So there's some level of engagement across your 9 major platforms, and we'll look at those numbers, which will give you a sense as well. T-Series, which some of you might know, is the biggest YouTube channel in the world. There's over 250 million subscribers, and it's an Indian channel that, and they generate about 3.5 billion views per month. And the most interesting point of this is I always knew that mobile was predominant, but it's 99.5% of social media consumption that happens on the mobile phone, right? And I think a lot of marketers tend to forget that, because when we work, we design our content and we look at it on laptops, and we're sort of creating content on laptops and we're creating it for a wider, bigger screen. But many times people forget to test how that experience plays out when you're looking at it on social media. But when you look at this, that should be how you're running it. So every time you check an asset or you check something, you should always see how things look on the mobile, because that's how 99.5% of your audience is consuming it. So just a few interesting numbers of Indian behavior and social media as well. Like I said, it's 9 platforms that Indians use once a month. And as you can see, this is probably that mix of what those 9 platforms would be. Obviously, there will be some in and out of different platforms, but these are the ones that have the largest scale and size in the market. WhatsApp is by far the most prominent, and I've put it in social media platforms because it has, they're working on sort of developing communities. They're trying to replicate a lot of what WeChat has done basically in China, in terms of, even bringing community purchase, all of that within this communication platform, which I think is really interesting. Obviously, the 531 million aren't using it necessarily as a social media platform, but I think it's important to just look at the scale of it. Instagram, thanks to Reels getting cancelled in India, is by far the most engaged platform right now with Indians, and it's over 500 billion people that are using Instagram. And I think what happens here is, the other thing that brands need to think about is, it's impossible to be, depending on what your budgets are, for most brands, it's impossible to be active across all of these platforms, right? But I think what brands need to do is pick the right mix, and then sort of really prioritize being active on social media, not just, cross-posting the same assets across platforms. So you need to really engage, you need to be active, you need to be really focusing on what you're doing when you're building a social media strategy. So I would suggest that some brands actually just double down on one platform instead of trying to be active across all 9, because in some shape or form, your consumer is going to engage with one of them, right? So you need to figure out where your core target is and then prioritize that platform. So for example, on my brand, we're basically prioritizing Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And LinkedIn is prioritizing a completely different audience from who we're targeting on YouTube and Instagram, because it's impossible for us to be active across all of the major platforms, given what our budgets are. And to be, when I'm talking about active, I mean active in a really meaningful way for your consumer. So it's a little bit about platforms. So how do you approach a social media campaign? And I think when you see this, it will feel basic, but I wanted to give you examples of how it really matters and what really resonates with people on social media, right? So the basic steps, it's a 5-step process, is you have an insight, which you find from your consumers or your audience. You evaluate that idea and see what potential it has in the market. You figure out your launch schedule post that, and you release it at a time where your insight will have maximum benefit. You then have to engage, because social media is not a one-way channel, it's a two-way conversation. So you need to engage and keep that conversation going when you release something. And the last piece is you need to monitor what the sentiment is like, what is happening once with that chatter, and then how do you pivot? Because with social media, you also have to be really, really flexible with your strategy, right? And usually when you have an insight can be polarizing because it's based on something that resonates with a large portion of the audience you're going after, but it might not resonate with everybody else, right? So you could see negative reaction, but how you monitor and engage and then decide to pivot depends on what is really happening there. So I wanted to also show you guys an example of what I mean by this when we move a little ahead in this presentation. But this sounds really simple, but this is actually what it is. Like, this is how you release a campaign on social media or an asset on social media. And you should be doing this for the biggest of assets and the smallest of assets. And typically you will have a decent response when you do that. So starting with the first step one, right, which was insights. How do you find the sweet spot for what a strong insight is, but also what will work for your brand? And I think that's the complicated part, right? Because not necessarily every consumer insight will resonate with your brand or what you're trying to put out for your product. So I've made Venn diagrams for each of these steps, and I think it kind of simplifies what I'm trying to say when I talk about this, right? So what is the intersection for your social media programming? It's where your consumers' needs and interests marries your product's USPs and offerings, right? So when you're the space in the middle is your playground when it comes to finding your insights. You shouldn't be trying to hard sell your product USPs on social media because that won't resonate with consumers. But you also shouldn't be trying to cater to every single one of your consumers' needs and interests because you're going to then just be bombarding them, and that's not exciting. There will be an intersection where your product matters to the consumer or at least has some level of resonance, and that's where your social media programming should play. What do I mean by this? I wanted to give you a great example because there's some brands that obviously have a lot more social currency, right? Like brands like Netflix, Spotify, Swiggy, Zomato, they already play into culture, right? Culture's about food, culture's about music, movies, right? So it's very easy because your overlap with your consumer is much more sizable in terms of what you can put out on social media. But think about Amul, right? It's butter. So what role does butter have to play in a person's life? It's usually breakfast, right? But what did they think about? They thought about your daily bread and butter. And what does that have in terms of an overlap with their consumer was daily news, right? So they literally decided to put out topical creatives every day that fed into the insight of being your daily bread and butter, but they always tied that insight back to Amul, right? So this World Cup creative, I think, is a great example of that. They gave a really sweet message to the men in blue, but finally they said taste in yellow, right? And it sort of ties back to butter at the end of the day, right? And their tone of voice has always been punny and endearing and cute. They always include the Amul girl in the narrative or the comic that they're creating. And then they've just been consistent. They've done this day after day after day after day. And it's become a commentary on pop culture. And that's a part of social media as well. It's about being consistent, right? So I love the example of Amul because it shows you how some products which are pretty basic can actually have very, very strong social media presence. So you don't have to be a Netflix or a Spotify or a big brand that has massive budgets and also has a brand that's a part of pop culture. You could be a very simple product, but has found that really amazing sweet spot for your brand when it comes to social media. So this is one example of how you can build a strong insight around your product and your audience. The second step was evaluating the idea, right? So how do you know when to go all in and how do you know when it should just be a simple static creative, right? So I think this is, again, what is the intersection? This is what a marketer or a social media executive is, right? The job is always a combination of art versus science. And the middle ground is your creative, right? So you will always need to marry some level of art and science when you come to deciding what a strong creative is. So the data, the insights from your audience is the science part, right? Like that's the numbers talking to you. That's you looking at understanding whether this idea has critical mass, so that's the science, right? The art is a lot on your experience and your creative instinct, right? So This will give you a sense. So as you start developing that idea with your agency, with your team, you will start getting a sense of how much potential that asset has, right? And you instinctively will be able to gauge whether, hey, this is an idea I want to build further and keep going, being more aggressive with, or whether it's a small scale idea that you want to sort of focus on a little more, right? And then the final part, and I think this is really important, is sometimes these insights are risky, right? Because like I said, it's a point of view which could be polarizing. You sometimes need to know when it's worth playing your chips and when you want to be cautious, because nobody wants to lose their job over an idea going wrong, right? So I think being able to balance that and balance that art and science, balance the risk versus reward, that's where you need to sort of evaluate the idea, and that falls on your shoulders as a social media executive. I think it's also interesting because the best marketing teams, the teams that have the strongest social media, are the ones that give the social media teams a lot of autonomy. So there's guardrails, but they also give them the ability to run with ideas. And that sort of takes me to, sorry, I was getting to this example and I'll get to point 3 later. But the example that I had here about making big bets was one that I personally worked on while I was at Netflix, which was the MoneyHeist Jaldi Aao anthem, right? So to give you a sense of how this plays out, initially, we always wanted to do an anthem for MoneyHeist because this was the last season for the show. But as we built the idea, we decided to completely pivot our strategy. And instead of doing, like, typically anthems happen at the end, you know, it's a recap of how everything went. It's a celebration of fandom. It's all of that. We flipped that completely and made it an anticipation anthem where fans were talking about how they couldn't wait for the show to launch. And that's where Jaldi Aao was born, right? Like, we wanted the show to come as soon as possible and fans couldn't wait anymore for it to release, right? And that was the way, the insight of just being like a Bella Ciao fan anthem celebrating fans became the Jaldi Aao fan anthem, which was an anticipation anthem, which instead of being just normal fans became a collection of super fans, because we're like, if this is going to be our launch asset and it's going to be the hero asset of our campaign, instead of just being a hygiene asset at the end, it needs to be big, right? So this is where I played my chips. And I was like, I'm going all in on this campaign. I want the biggest faces. I wanted to reach critical mass, which means it's reaching a very large volume of that 400 million, you know, consumers that we're talking about. Obviously, it's not reaching 400 million, but it reached a very sizable volume. We had it on cricket, we had it everywhere. And we were using a lot of really big faces to have it reach out, right? And from there, you have that kind of buildup that happens. But this is where that art versus science part comes into play, right? I knew there was some level of fandom around this show, but I didn't know how big the potential was. But I was like, this is an instance where it's worth taking a risk and it's worth going all in, because the downside was not much. The downside was, hey, yes, this is impacting my budget, and it's only speaking to MoneyHeist fans. It's not going wider than that. But the upside was I'm able to capture a massive new audience by releasing this asset on social media and really creating buzz for the show. And that's ultimately what happened, right? We managed to capture a much wider base because we decided to go all in on this asset instead of holding back and just making it a smaller piece. So that's just a sense of how you can make bigger bets. There's also examples of how you can do smaller ones, but I wanted to leave you with this given the time that we have. What I was talking about earlier was timing, right? And a lot of timing, when you release it, matters, right? So even with the MoneyHeist anthem, we decided to release it beforehand, early, because we knew that was the time to capture new audience, and it was the last season of the show. So there's no point making a massive buzz once the show's over, because yes, people might come and watch it later on, but you've lost the hype, because by then spoilers are out. By then the anticipation has died down. The super fans have already seen it, right? So the timing of that asset mattered a lot. So making that big bet really mattered. But this can happen in tons of other ideas, right? You have a strong creative idea and you're trying to tie it with a cultural moment, a trend, or a big moment for your brand, right? That middle ground is your release date. You need to hit your deadlines, right? So I think this is the challenge that a lot of creative folk have, especially in marketing, is the creative can always become better. It can always become better. It can always go through an additional round of feedback. It can always add in that little more detail that will make it perfect. But sometimes you have to toss up between what's good enough to hit your deadline versus a perfect asset where you've missed the boat, right? And you see this happening with a lot of traditional companies where they go into feedback loops. They, the social media guy is ready to run with it, but they have to get approval from the marketing head. The marketing head has to get approval from the CMO. The CMO has to get approval from the global brand head. And by the time it releases, it's a month after when you really wanted it to go out, and you've literally missed the boat, right? So I think that's where the marketers really need to be able to give more autonomy to social media executives, because pace is everything when it comes to social media marketing. And the fewer feedback loops there are, the more effective you will be to get this out. But obviously, it should not be half-baked, because, like I said, that risk-reward debate is something that will then sit on the social media executives' shoulders. And it's something you need to be careful about, right? So when I'm saying good enough, it needs to be good. It needs to be a good asset, but it doesn't have to, like when I look at the Jaldi Aao anthem, for example, I see all the issues because there was 20 more things that I wanted to do to that creative to make it perfect. But once we hit a point and I was like, this is the date it has to go live, we stuck to our deadline. And I think that's super important when it comes to social media. The best example I have for this, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen this, is the Cadbury Shah Rukh Khan My Ad that they released over Diwali. I think they timed certain things really well, right? They wanted to be the first mover when it came to leveraging a big ticket AI campaign in India. And the reason everyone talks about this ad, if you guys haven't seen it, please look it up on Google as well and take a look. It's the one that everyone talks about. And the reason that is because they used AI in a really, really innovative manner. And they did it way before anyone else did in the market at scale, right? So there were other brands that had done this. It's not game-changing technology. It's existed for a while. But they decided to use it with one, Shah Rukh Khan, release it during Diwali, and make it their hero campaign at that big festive moment, right? So why did this matter? For Cadbury, celebration is everything, right? So what bigger celebration is there in India besides Diwali? What bigger star is there than Shah Rukh Khan? What were they trying to do with this? They were trying to give back to their distributors by giving them a Shah Rukh Khan ad. Why does that matter for them? Because for them, distribution is everything. Because if the stores don't have their chocolates, they're not going to drive volume, right? So the insight was amazing. They took a big bet. They invested a lot of money to make something happen at this level, at this scale, to convince Shah Rukh Khan. But they didn't miss the boat. They made sure they got it out ahead of everybody in Diwali. They had it run as a very strong Diwali campaign. They had a whole build-up, and they beat everyone when it came to using AI technology. So the timing of that was incredible. There's 20 or 30 other brands that have done this better. And they've done it, but this has been their reference and nobody's spoken about them. Why is that? Because they didn't time it well enough, right? So they were reactive to what Cadbury's done instead of being ahead of the game, right? Which is what Cadbury did. So that's an example of how you really need to figure out when to launch and what the right time is for yourself. Finally, the fourth point that I had on the deck was about engagement, right? So we know social media is a conversation, which means you need to define a tone of voice for your brand, and you need to stick to that. So your tone of voice needs to have a level of longevity, right? So it can't be something that your brand can't keep on changing its voice. It's like a person. Your voice might evolve. It might move as you sort of grow up as a brand, but it stays consistent to a certain level. And that's why defining what your tone of voice is super important for a brand. So how do you figure out what that is? There's brand guidelines, which your brand team will develop for you, which are like your principles, right? What does your brand stand for? How does it look? How does it represent itself? All of that kind of builds out in your brand guidelines. And then there's your brand personality. So if your brand became a human being, what would that brand be like? What do they like? How would they talk? What would be the words that they use? What are the do's and don'ts, right? So when you combine both of these, that's where you land on what your tone of voice is. What's important for this is that you need to remain consistent. Like I was saying, your voice shouldn't keep changing. So you shouldn't necessarily take a big risk with being too edgy if you feel like you can't stick to that for years to come, right? So I think that's important, and that needs to come out in everything that you do. So it needs to come out in the creative you put out. It needs to come out in your copy. It needs to come out in your response strategy, because you need to use your tone of voice to define how you respond and engage with your consumers. And you need to have a very clear list of do's and don'ts, right? So the example that I wanted to give you is the company where I work at right now. It's Duolingo. It's one of the most well-known brands for its response strategy, right? And it's a edgy brand strategy, but it's been super consistent in terms of what it's done over the years, right? So what was the insight? Duolingo's product is known to be annoying, right? And I mean that in the best way. Its notifications push you to do your lesson, and the longer it takes, and if you're going to lose your streak, it gets more and more pushy, and it's more and more in your face to make sure that you take those 15 minutes and you do your lesson, right? So, and it works. So so many of our consumers talk about how the notifications really keep them going and keeps them dedicated to learning and investing in the language that they're trying to learn on the platform. But this started a lot of chatter on social media around how persistent the owl is. And they're like, oh my God, this owl's aggressive. He is unhinged. He's hilarious. Like, all of those were comments that sort of started playing out in terms of what our consumers were saying. So we decided, instead of shying away from that, let's own it and let's make that Duo's personality, right? So I think it's really interesting to see Duo's character play out, right? So when you see the screenshot that I have on the screen, he's always cheeky with his consumers, right? He's confident. He thinks he's the best. He's all of that, right? Like, but what makes this so exciting is that this is what people live for on social media, right? So many people in our audience actually write comments and engage with Duo just to see how he will respond. And more than any other creative that we put out, it's the response and the engagement that people come back for and people follow us for. And that's created a massive community, right? So because of that, you're creating these learning hubs and you're seeing people compete on their streak. We've seen people start dating and get married. There's a lot of PR around Duolingo being a dating app right now, which you guys can also look up on social media. But this is because of community, right? And that's what you want to do when you're a strong social media brand. The final piece, and this is, I think, the hardest part when it comes to social media, is how do you monitor things when things are going wrong? And I'm sorry, I didn't update this Venn diagram. I missed it. It's my bad. But I think we can forget about that for now. But what we need to focus on is sentiment, right? And what I would have written here if this was updated is there's negative sentiment, there's positive sentiment, and in the middle is what your reaction would be, right? And what do I mean by that is when you put out a strong asset, you will always have polarizing perspectives. But I think what you need to understand, and this is again where your role as a marketer and a social media manager is massive, because you need to make a judgment call on where that sentiment is going, right? So in some cases, you've made a genuine mistake. Like, you've made a mistake in your creative and you need to own it. And how you own that is one part of managing it. The second is you might have backlash with a wider audience that you don't want to talk to anyway. And that's the audience that is always going to react. We see hashtag boycott XYZ happening on Twitter every single day. There's always something that the janta is angry about, right? So sometimes you need to be like, hey, I'm not saving anyone's lives. This will brush over. And the audience that I want to talk to really resonates with what we've put out, right? So it's a really tough call, because when you're getting hate, it's really uncomfortable and it's a very difficult thing to deal with, right? I don't know if any of you have dealt with trolls in your personal life. I hope not, but if you have, you know that it is supremely aggressive and it is scary and it's uncomfortable, right? So, but what you need to do when you are managing this as a social media executive is, one, be like, hey, it's social media. It's not like what I'm doing is not life-changing. It's a creative asset and this will blow over. The second thing is to understand what call you're taking, right? So is your call being like, I need to apologize anytime somebody gets angry? That should not be the case. You would not be putting out anything on social media if that was the case. If it is, hey, I want to hold my ground on this, for how long and what's the risk you're willing to take, right? So the easiest way to explain this to you is actually play my example. To give you context, this is a film that Nike had put out. It started out as a simple social media static. They were sponsoring Colin Kaepernick. He was one of their brand ambassadors in the US. And they had signed him up long before this event happened, right? He took a knee during one of his major games, during the American anthem, national anthem. And this was huge because it is like, America's a super patriotic country, a lot like India in those senses. And there was massive backlash. The reason he did this was in support of Black Lives Matter, right? So he was really building a narrative well before the level of support that came for Black Lives Matter happened in the US. This was the starting point of it, or the initial period of that happening. What Nike did was a lot of people were saying that Nike should drop him. Instead, they said that Dream Crazy is a message that Nike puts out, and we will support Colin Kaepernick. And instead of dropping him as a brand ambassador, they invested further in him, right? So I'm going to play this case study, and that's the end of my presentation. And I want to kind of stop to discuss after that. So I'll talk about this film after I play it. So
don't be shy. It's not the end of the world.
Take it easy. Anyone can have clear skin.
What are you waiting for?
we need to wait for the other ads to play.
Several people posting videos burning Nike shoes.
Nike is running straight into a political controversy.
People are so angry they're burning their own shoes.
Colin Kaepernick refused to stand during the national anthem, taking a knee to protest police brutality.
Nike revealed Colin Kaepernick as the face of its latest marketing campaign.
Believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything.
Is Nike taking a risk?
They're taking a stand.
Tonight, the first game of the new season, and Nike is running an ad featuring Colin Kaepernick.
If people say your dreams are crazy, good. Stay that way.
Most of this country was talking about this last night at their dinner table.
And I'm never buying another Nike product again.
Nike stock today dropping 3%.
Who's going to win this cultural showdown of standing for the anthem?
We are. Check this out. I went out today and bought me some Nikes.
Oh. I want to applaud Nike. Speak up. We're right behind you.
This thing is bigger than just the United States, and I think it resonates throughout the world.
Kaepernick asegura que es
Hello.
Nike stock reached an all-time high last Friday.
Hello.
Buy more Nikes now.
Nike's on the right side of history.
Hello.
So don't ask if your dreams are crazy. Ask if they're crazy enough.
So yeah, so the reason I wanted to put that up was that initial sentiment was horrific for Nike, right? They had so much backlash from their consumers initially, and you saw the stock dropped, all of that happened, and it was frightening, right? So if you were a brand manager at that point, the automatic response people would have expected, and a lot of brands would have done this, would have been to drop Colin Kaepernick and put out an apology. But their social media manager was amazing. They were looking at the sentiment and they were like, hey, yes, the high volume is this negative chatter, but we're seeing a string of very strong, very influential voices who are applauding us for what we're doing. And believe me, if we hold on for a little longer, we will see a positive shift. And that is exactly what happened. And that's the job that a social media manager has, right? They waited for that flip, and you saw that stock rise. You saw people who had nothing to do with Nike, who were not paid money by Nike, the biggest names in America becoming brand advocates, right? And that's the power of social media in those kind of ways, right? So I've just tried to take you through the steps of how you can approach it, leave you with a little bit of inspiration, because that Nike film is my favorite. Like, I love that case study because I think it's really, really powerful. And it's testament to how social media can move stock, which is ultimately what every business wants to do, right? So I'm going to stop here. Raghav, I'm going to throw it back to you in case you want to figure out how to navigate Q&A. So I just wanted to make sure that we have a good amount of time to answer some questions and then close out however you would like to.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much, Tara, for such an insightful address over multiple layers of how social media marketing has been established and what are the latest updates over the same. Guys, now it's the best time for us to utilize this space we believe that we all have flexibility to even unmute ourselves. So please unmute yourself, or maybe you can use the chat space to ask your question or queries.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello, good evening, sir.
Hi, Kritik.
Sir, actually, I want to know that what is the agenda of today's session like related to social media. Actually, I have joined late, so that's why.
Okay. Tara, would you like to take it or shall I brief him up?
You can go ahead, because I think you can set the context of the entire session.
Got it. So Kritik, it's never too late, okay? But let me help you understand. Since social media marketing has been always a hotshot topic for entrepreneurs, for freelancers, or maybe for regular marketing professionals. So what we have tried to build over here is that we are making you understand that how utilization over multiple platforms can be more engaging, and what kind of tools or what kind of algorithms we can utilize to define your brand goals even at a wider space. Then we have also witnessed some examples of how and what kind of new implementations can be brought up. So this was a combination of, all these things. This is where Tara has guided all of us to, what are the latest trends in social media marketing. And probably for all of you, not even just Kritik, in case if you have joined late or if you have missed some of the insights, feel free to drop your email IDs on the chat space. I shall share the recording of this masterclass with all of you to make it more comfortable.
Okay, sir. So I have to send on the chat box?
Yeah, you can simply drop your email address over the chat box and I shall take it further.
Okay, sir.
Hi, would it be
Everyone.
alright? Sorry
Super.
about
I think everyone can use the hand feature, but Devika, we'll start with you. But for anyone who has questions, just use the hand option in Zoom, and then we can follow the order of questions from there.
Got it. I'm sorry about that. I wasn't able
No,
to.
we didn't say that earlier, but Devika, you can go ahead because I know I saw you on the screen, and then we can follow that with everyone else.
Sure. Firstly, I had a comment. I just wanted to say I really enjoyed the session, and I work as a brand strategist, so I guess I see the advertising perspective, and this was very insightful to see the marketing side of it, and I guess get a better idea of social media. I had a bit of a specific question, maybe not entirely related to the session, but I wanted to understand from a brand strategy point of view, how would you recommend someone go about entering social media on the marketing side?
Are you saying from advertising to marketing?
Yes.
So I think a part of it is just kind of building relationship with your clients. So a lot of people, you will sort of see them transition from agency to people that they've worked with as clients, right? Because ultimately your network is your strongest tool to make that transition. Plus there are people who already know what your skill sets are, what your creative chops are, and how you react to certain things. So one part is literally just seeing which brands you're excited working with, when you're at an agency, and then seeing what avenues open up. A caveat there is some agencies have non-competes because they don't want they don't want that movement to happen. But what you can do is, and I've seen this happen a lot, is, for example, we had a lot of agency people who used to work on our brand while I was at Netflix, and they would then move brand side at a competitor, right? So a Hotstar or an Amazon Prime or any of these other brands would be very excited to hire agency folk who had worked on their competitor brand, right? So those are the kind of ways that you could look at making those pivots. Having said that, it's not easy. So you also need to have a little bit of a thick skin, right? Because when you're trying to make a shift, and I've done this in my career a couple of times, and it's kind of speaking from that experience where you will get a lot of rejection, but you need to sort of have a thick skin and go through that motion a couple of times, and eventually it will work out in the way you want it to. So those are just 3 ways that you could explore making a shift like that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that.
No worries. Raghav, do you want to manage who's going next? I haven't been following the hands.
Yes, I believe we have 2 platforms over here because there are some questions which are on the chat section as well. And
I'll
probably
leave it to you to navigate who to go to.
no worries, no worries. I believe the question of the chat space, there are just 2-3 questions. Let's answer them, then we can entertain people with the hands up action.
Yeah, sounds good.
So I'll help you with the questions first. Amol Gadkar, it is what is the main work of social media manager?
It's pretty much covered in the description itself, right? You're managing social media. That is the core role that you have as a social media executive. What does that entail is everything, right? So it would be defining what the content pillars would be. What is the brand strategy, first of all, right? So what is the objective of each social media platform for the brand? Which are the platforms you should prioritize, right? So for example, right now in my role, I'm also managing social media as a part of doing 360 marketing for my brand. When I did that, and when I was defining the social media strategy for the brand, we tossed up about which platforms are important, what language is important, what are the content buckets, what are the separate examples and pillars that I want to create under those buckets of content, how regularly do we post, what is our response strategy, what are the captions, what are the thumbnails, actually posting it, you do it all, right? So I think that's a bit of what a social media manager does. It's an exciting job, but it's also a job that is around the clock. So you need to be aware of what's happening. You need to understand the trends. You need to understand pretty much everything. So anything that has to do with social media, a social media manager will be looking into. Sorry, anything organic, not paid. So you would typically be looking at organic engagement and not.
Then we have a question from Soumya. It is, what is the future for social media marketing?
That I showed you guys right in the beginning about the scope, right? The scope for social media is massive. People live online, people live on digital. We don't know which platforms will survive as we sort of go ahead. Yes, I can put that slide up. It's a simple slide. Is basically the scale of the market itself, so it gives you a sense of the numbers itself, right? Like everyone lives on social media. I'm sure all of you are on social media in some shape or form, active on certain platforms. It's where you have your conversations. It's where you engage. It's where you shop. It's where you do everything, right? So I think anyone in today's day and age, if you're not focusing on social media as a marketing manager, then that's something you should be a little concerned about, because you're not engaging with people right where you need to be. So it is definitely important. And in fact, there's a lot of people who are talking about how the new shift when it comes to CMOs should be people who have social media background, right? So initially, there was a lot of debate about social media managers not being rounded enough and not having the potential to become CMOs. There are people who are actually thinking about how that's evolving, because social media is so central to where marketing is today.
Can you give me one example for case study? Any example? Give me one example for case study.
Of what?
Marketing strategy. Give me one brand.
So there were many brands that I had sort of presented on the deck itself, right? So Netflix is a great example of a brand that uses social media super well, which also helps them acquire their audience. Swiggy, Zomato are two brands that are amazing on social media. Cred does an incredible job on social media. Nike, which was the video that I showed right at the end, incredible, super reactive when their athletes are winning sport. Their message and their mission is everyone's an athlete, so they do a great job of not only celebrating the best of the best, but also celebrating achievements of people who use their products or people who believe in the power of sport, right? So there's tons of examples out there. In the Amul example that I had on the slide is another one. Duolingo itself is reactive, right? So there's tons. I can keep talking about this, but that's just a few.
There's another question by AK. So it is, can you please help us to know how a small company can build a brand organically?
That's a hard one because, I think building only organic is difficult in today's day and age, just given the clutter and the volume of content that's out there. But I think the core way to do it is really, really identify your niche, right? And what is scale for you? Because in an initial period, you're not going to be able to scale up very rapidly, especially if you're focusing only on organic. But you need to then really target that hyper detailed persona, right? So for every product that you're putting out, you will have certain audiences. You'll have about 4 or 5 different personas of people that would probably purchase your product. In this case, you have to be really, really specific. So how will you find this out? You will find this out from people who in that small stage are already engaging with you, right? So those are your super consumers. Those are people who are already buying your product before it's become famous or before it's a well-known brand. And those are the people, those are your custodians that you need to capture, do consumer insights with them, understand what works, understand what they like about your product, and then keep amplifying that on social media. That's how I would see you sort of building that out.
And there's one interesting question from Rhythm Sethi. She mentions these days, as you know, people are in the favor of increasing the followers through SMM panels. Can you share the insight how useful it is and why these days people only ask for kitne followers increase honge?
I mean, I don't think everyone does that. And I don't think that is actually the right approach when it comes to social media, because more than followers, it's about engagement. So you even see it with some of the biggest creators out there, right? Like they might have cultivated very large following, but ultimately the engagement of their assets doesn't really resonate as much. So I think that's a smaller way of looking at social media. I think the examples that we presented are examples that are best in case, which gives you a sense of how much wider the scale and ability of social media is beyond just followers.
Yeah, I believe let's start with Madhushri. Can you please speak about your question?
Hi, I just posted my question in the group as well. I'll just read it out. How does analytics come into play in social media marketing? I mean, honestly, in personal experience, I've always seen data to be used into product development side of it. But does the analytics part also come into play when it comes to social media marketing?
Absolutely. I think data tells you a lot, right? And especially when you're in the stage of trying to achieve many things, right? So I think from the starting point in that flow is when you're developing your insight, right? At that stage, you need data to let you know if your idea has critical mass, right? Because you need to look at whether this will resonate with a high volume of people or that target audience that you're going after. And that's the only thing your numbers will tell you, right? Like it's not something that you will be able to just figure out on your own. And I think you have metrics on every social media platform, right? So it's telling you what assets are performing. It's giving you signals of engagement levels. It's giving you an understanding of sentiment, how many people are leaning more positive. It's telling you what drop-off points are in an asset, right? So, using data, what point in your asset didn't work, because that's the point where majority of your viewers are dropping off, right? So there's a lot that you can use numbers for when it comes to social media, and most social media managers use it. Like I said, it's that art and science combination, right? Marketing is that one career that really marries both. And it's kind of figuring out where you land, because you can't only use data to put out a creative. And another really good example of how data and creative have come out together is things like the Spotify Wrapped report, right, which is released today itself. Just that ability of using the numbers and the data that each consumer has, but making it into such engaging creative that people want to post on their stories and post on social media, is a great example of how data and art come together.
Oh, thank you so much.
Always, you can ask your question.
Hello.
Yes.
How can we grow our marketing career without degree?
It depends on what you're doing right now, right? So depending on your experience, you need to prove that you can do marketing without it, right? So for example, I didn't have a marketing degree. I was a journalist for a long part of my career, and then moved to advertising and then moved to marketing. And I think that journey, yeah. So I think it was sort of that ability to prove that you can do a role and then sort of move, is the way you have to do it. It's a lot slower than having a degree, but you can't just get a job because you want it, right? You have to be able to prove that you can do it. And one way of proving that you can do the job is by getting a degree, showcasing you have expertise. The other way is to do jobs that mirror what you want, right? So for example, while I was a journalist, I was producing a show. I would, shoot content. I would write scripts. I would try to make them more creative. So every time I did a story, it had a little bit of marketing to it, right? And I was sort of able to build that out. That helped me get a job at an agency. While I was at agency, I helped build campaigns for a lot of brands. From there, I moved to a brand. It was a smaller brand initially because, bigger brands don't hire you immediately without having the relevant work X. And then from there, I gradually moved on. But that's sort of one way that you can do it. And it is possible because marketing is a job where a lot of it is common sense. So if you have the ability and you have the risk appetite to be able to take chances once in a while and, have some assets that get a lot of backlash, and you have the thick skin, you have the ability to operate and have a pulse of what's happening, you could easily have a job in marketing.
Okay, Nishant, you can go next.
Hi Tara, that was actually a quite insightful session. I don't recall if you recall me. We were together on a panel once.
Good to see you.
Yeah, it was a really good session. Honestly, it was quite elaborative, but something which crossed my mind right now is what are your thoughts on what do you think how generative AI is going to help or destroy social media, or how are going to use it, or maybe are a lot of companies interested towards doing it? But what do you think are the chances of even the audience being ready for something which is still in talks?
I think it's two parts, right? One is it's going to be creating a lot more volume and a lot more clutter on social media, right? So that volume of content, which is already so high, is going to exponentially grow because it's now cheap and easy to create really, really high volumes of content, right? So discoverability is going to be a lot harder. So getting your content to be visible, I think, is going to be one of the big shifts, right? Like, it's already hard. It's going to become that much harder. So having a strong distribution strategy is imperative, right, for social media. Otherwise, you could create the best thing in the world and it's just not going to get anywhere, right? So you will need strong PR, you need strong distribution channels, you need to work with influencers, you need to do a lot more to have that content be visible. I think, and this is very hypothetical, but I feel like there will be a shift where you start seeing taste hunters sort of coming back to the forefront, right? So there was a time when we had platforms that really curated content for people. I think that will probably come back in some shape or form because somebody needs to sift through all of that content and tell people what works. And that's an interesting shift that might happen. And then finally, you will have things like the Cadbury ad. You will have these really powerful combinations of where technology and creativity marry really, really beautifully. And I think that's sort of how you will see the shift. I don't think and you will also see some level of changing of jobs, right? Some jobs will become redundant, but new jobs will pop up. But that's the kind of shift that I think Gen AI is creating in the industry today.
Actually, I am confused. How can I pitch anyone while I'm in meeting? I will confuse which way I go. How can I pitch any client?
But pitch what?
Like first meeting, in client first meeting, how can I convince them for do marketing? I find their problems. I find their solution, but how much budget I tell them? I am confused in budgeting.
What are you doing currently?
I have owned my marketing agency. It's just a startup.
Yeah, so I think one that is what I was talking about earlier, right? Like it's not necessarily easy because there are a lot of established teams and players and it's a very cluttered market right now. So you need to have some level of proof of concept, right? So there are things that people do to stand out. And I think one of the things that people do to stand out is actually create things. And sometimes you do it pro bono, you do it in ways that like you do it for smaller brands that don't have budgets as a starting point. Because once you prove success, that's when you can convince bigger brands. Because like I said, like you can't just be like, hey, I have an idea, I want to work with you, until you can actually prove that you can execute and deliver that idea. And you have a strong enough pipeline of examples of what you've done in the past as well.
So, Sakshi, you can go next.
Yeah. Hi, Tara. I actually work as a social media manager at Meesho. So recently we underwent a lot of change in content buckets and everything. And currently, since the past 3 months, we have been the most engaged brand on social in India. But something that I'm facing a hurdle with is really connecting with the audience when it comes to posts like a topical or something relatable. Like Swiggy has aced this game, Zomato has aced this game, but my audience is not Swiggy audience. So even if I put out the same message through Meesho, it's not going to connect and I'm not getting an engagement. So how should I reach out to them? Because Meesho audience, if you even think of that, they're mostly like tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 people. And those are the kind of people coming and just telling us like just commenting. Those are the kind of people. So what kind of references can I have on that level?
Yeah, I think you've sort of answered the question yourself.
Yeah. But I just wanted some examples from your end.
So I think the first is you've said it, right? Like not every brand can have a point of view on every topical moment, right? There are some brands that have a lot stronger social currency, and that's because these are brands that exist in pop culture, right? Yeah. It's easy for a Swiggy, a Zomato, a Netflix, and a lot of brands like this, which have a role to play in your day-to-day, but also have a role to play in pop culture.
Yeah.
For them to have a point of view on everything. You're watching a cricket match, you want to order something to eat. You're celebrating something, you want to order food. It's a festival, there's a certain kind of cuisine you want to eat, right? So it's easy for those brands to have commentary because everything has, like, you're talking about the moon landing, you can relate how the moon looks like a laddu, right? Like there's so much that you can do when it comes to food and pop culture. And that's what makes it easy to be topical, right? When it comes to other brands, like products that don't have that same level of social currency, you need to pick your moments, right? So for example, right now, my product is a test.
Yeah.
What can I talk about from a topical moment with a test? I shouldn't be talking about everything, right? But there's clever ways that I can do it. And there's ways that I can pick certain moments and not everyone, right? So your job as a social media manager needs to be to tell marketing leadership, hey, listen, as our brand, we can't say everything because then we stand for nothing. We have to have a point of view in this space. So that overlap of my product and what my audience cares about is where I need to play.
Yeah.
That still has width, right? So for example, my product's a testing product. which means I'm playing in the education space, but I'm also playing in the study abroad education place, right? So yes, I do want to have a conversation about Diwali. No, it will not be my biggest brand, right? So I'm not going to create a Cadbury level campaign during Diwali because that's not the peak time that my consumers thinking about studying abroad, right? But what can I do during Diwali? I can do a simple reel or a video where the friends of students who have gone to abroad are talking about how they miss them on Diwali. And they're like, as you celebrate abroad for the first time in your life, here's wishing you a happy Diwali and we miss you, right?
Yeah.
That resonates with my audience. That's
Yeah.
social force. But that's me also being like, hey, on a Diwali, I know this is not going to be a hyper visible creative, which is
Yeah.
why I will make it a smaller, low investment, but still playing in that reactive space, right? So that creative did really well for us at our scale, but it wasn't a viral creative. But like I could have a viral creative during the peak season of when students are studying abroad, right? Which is around September, October, when they take their test and they're applying and they're going through application season. That's when I can really have a strong moment with my core consumer, right? So something viral for my brand, it doesn't mean bursting the social media zeitgeist, right? It means something that resonates with my core audience. So that's what your job will need to be in this space.
Got it. Also, just one last thing. Who are taste hunters in the past, like prominent, like you just mentioned, like some that I could look up and just
I mean, this is a rough example, but it's kind of how the creator economy started, right? Like, so influencers themselves initially started as taste hunters, some of them. And then you had platforms like a BuzzFeed at one point when it started was technically taste hunting in some shape or form, right? Like, so you had a lot of platforms like this that used to find what was trending and what was really standing out. But I feel like what that stands for will evolve in this new age.
Agreed. Thank you so much, Tara. It was really great listening to you.
No worries. Thank you.
All right. So I believe that we are running off the time. I'm sure that you all have enjoyed the session and there must be some people who still have their questions left. But never mind. I believe that we will be still in communication through other platforms as well. And probably you can reach out to Tara via her LinkedIn network as well. Maybe you can get your questions answered and maybe you can interact with her over there as well. And so quickly, let me help you now understand about few important links, which I'm going to upload over the chat section. I believe that the diversity...
I have to jump for another call.
No worries, Tara. Thank you for joining in today.
Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.
Yeah. So folks, I'm going to upload few links about the program that we offer. So basically, Masters Union has joined forces with a brand, or you can say a marketing firm called Shebang. It's one of the leading firm in India. In this, we have created a curriculum which is related to people who are looking forward to transition into core marketing roles and or someone who's looking forward to uplift their existing career towards strategic marketing. So I insist you all to go through this program curriculum, and there's an application link as well. And further, we're also going to follow a deadline within which you can apply for the program. So I'm going to upload that as well. And further, we would like to again be in touch. So you can email us any kind of question or query that you'd like to share with us over MasterCamp admissions at mastersunion.org. This is where you can put up your questions or you can email us. And our team is going to be available there to entertain all your questions and queries. So once again, thank you all for tuning in today. I literally enjoyed this session with all of you, and I hope that we all have filled our treasury with a lot of insights by our speaker as well, and hope you all have a great week ahead. Thank you once again.